Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're continuing our exploration of inhuman sociology, looking at how technology and human society are kind of becoming more and more intertwined.
Yeah, exactly. And this time, we're going to really dive deep into Massimo Airoldi's book, Machine Habitus, toward a sociology of algorithms.
The title sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I was a little intimidated at first.
It does sound a bit like, a dense academic text.
Right.
But trust me, it's way more interesting than you might think. Airoldi's work is all about how algorithms, especially those powered by machine learning, develop, what he calls cultural tendencies.
Okay.
Almost like digital personalities, you could say. And they're shaped by the data they're fed.
Digital personalities.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to think about it. But let's break it down a bit. This idea of machine habitus, where does that even come from?
Well, Airoldi borrows this concept of habitus from the famous sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. And it's this really fascinating idea that our social environment, like our upbringing, the experiences we have, they all shape our dispositions, our habits, even our biases.
So is Airoldi suggesting that algorithms go through a similar process of socialization, like they're shaped by their experiences?
Exactly. He argues that just like our experiences mold us, algorithms are, in a way, socialized by the massive amounts of data they're trained on.
Okay.
And they develop certain tendencies, preferences, blind spots even, based on that data.
Now, early on in the book, Airoldi talks about different eras of algorithms. The analog, the digital, and what he calls the platform era.
Right.
Why is this distinction so important?
I think it's important because it shows how the influence of algorithms on our lives has just grown so much over time.
Okay.
So, in the analog era, algorithms were mostly confined to mathematical formulas like basic calculations or even mechanical devices. Think like, a simple lever or pulley. Then we moved into the digital era with computers and software. And this allowed us to automate much more complex tasks.
Right, like those early computer programs.
Yeah.
Or the first versions of the internet.
Exactly. But it's in the platform era with Google, Facebook, Amazon, where things really explode.
Yeah.
With machine learning, algorithms are no longer just following these pre-programmed rules. They're learning from data, making predictions, and influencing our decisions in ways we don't even realize.
And that's where this machine habitus becomes really crucial, right? Because if these algorithms are learning from data that reflects our society with all its flaws and biases, they're going to pick up on those things too.
Exactly. We can't just assume that algorithms are neutral or objective. We have to understand how they're being shaped by this data and what that means for us.
One of the most interesting examples in the book is this AI called IAQOS.
Oh, yeah.
They call it the Topinatara Baby AI because it was trained like a human baby, interacting with an actual community.
It's a really fascinating project. It highlights this social aspect of algorithmic development. The creators placed IAQOS in Torpignattara, which is this lively multicultural neighborhood in Rome. And just like a child, it learned about the world through interactions with the people there, absorbing information from the environment.
So the same algorithm, if it had been trained in like a very different environment, would have developed a completely different personality.
Absolutely. That's the whole point. The IAQOS project shows how an algorithm's, machine habitus is deeply influenced by its social surroundings.
Okay, so that makes sense for this art project. But IAQOS is unique. How does this machine socialization happen in, like, the algorithms we encounter every day, the ones in our search results or social media feeds?
Airoldi points to a few different factors, and one of the most important is what he calls the deus in machina.
Wait, Deus in Machina?
Yeah.
Isn't that from, like, ancient Greek plays?
It is, but Airoldi uses it to show how human values get built into these systems, even if it's unintentional. The designers, the programmers, they all have their own backgrounds and experiences, and those influence the way they build and train these algorithms.
That's kind of unsettling, It means the algorithms we use every day might be reflecting the biases of a very specific group of people.
That's a valid concern.
And the book mentions that most people who create AI are still white men.
Yeah.
So does that mean their worldview is being embedded into these systems that shape our lives?
It's definitely something to think about. If the data and the algorithms are primarily reflecting a limited set of perspectives, then it's very likely that we'll see those biases amplified in the results.
It's like building a house with a warped foundation.
Yeah.
No matter how beautiful the structure, you're going to have problems eventually.
Exactly. And we see these problems in the form of algorithmic discrimination, which is, unfortunately, very real.
Right, like that compass system used in the U.S. justice system. It was supposed to predict recidivism risk, but it ended up unfairly targeting black defendants.
That's a perfect example of how societal biases can sneak into algorithms.
Hmm.
Compass was trained on data that already reflected those racial disparities in the criminal justice system, so it's not surprising that it just ended up perpetuating those inequalities.
So it's not just garbage in, garbage out. It's
Right.
more like society in, society out, as Airoldi puts it.
Exactly. The data itself is a reflection of our complex, often unequal world, and we have to be very careful not to just replicate those biases in the algorithms we create.
Okay, so we have this deus in machina, the values of the creators, that shapes these algorithms.
Hmm.
But there are other ways that algorithms are socialized too, right? Like, what about users? We play a role in this process, don't we?
Absolutely. Airoldi talks about two kinds of machine trainers, the massive, often unwitting crowds of platform users,
Right.
and then the often underpaid micro workers who annotate data for AI systems.
So every time we like a post or click a link, we're feeding these algorithms information, and
Yeah.
that shapes how they behave.
Exactly. Every interaction, every choice you make online becomes a data point that helps an algorithm understand the world.
Wow.
You're basically helping it learn and adapt.
It's both fascinating and kind of creepy to realize how much power we have to shape these systems, even if we don't always realize it.
It is. It really highlights the fact that technology and society are constantly influencing and shaping each other, and we're only just beginning to understand how.
Okay, so algorithms are being socialized. They're developing these digital personalities shaped by their creators and the users.
Uh-huh.
But what happens next? Once they have this machine habitus, do they just run on autopilot? Or is there more to the story?
There's definitely more to the story.
Okay.
Airoldi delves into these concepts of machine agency and computational authority to explain how algorithms actually exert power and influence human behavior, even though they don't have consciousness.
Hold on, machine agency. Are you saying algorithms are making their own decisions now?
It's not quite that simple, but the idea is that algorithms, even without any conscious intent, can have a real impact on our actions and choices.
Okay, can you give me an example? This is starting to sound a little bit science fiction-y.
Well, think about those recommendation algorithms on streaming services.
Okay.
They analyze your listening history and suggest, new songs or artists you might enjoy. The algorithm isn't consciously trying to manipulate you, it's just crunching data.
Right, making predictions.
Exactly. But those predictions can actually shape your listening habits, expose you to new genres, even influence the popularity of certain artists. That's a form of influence, even if it's not intentional.
Okay, so we're not talking about Skynet taking over the world. Not yet, at least.
No, not quite.
But we are talking about algorithms having a real impact on our lives.
Yeah. They're not just passive tools anymore. They're shaping how we get information, influencing our choices, even mediating our relationships with other people.
Okay, that makes sense. What about computational authority? What does that mean?
So computational authority is about how algorithms, because they seem so objective and efficient, have gained a certain kind of authority in our society.
Right.
We trust their recommendations, we rely on their predictions, and sometimes we even defer to their decisions, even though we might not fully understand how they work.
It's like we give them the benefit of the doubt because they seem so complex.
Exactly. And that trust, that perceived authority, is a big part of why they become so powerful. We often just choose the top search result on Google or watch the video that YouTube recommends, even though we know these systems are designed to make money, not necessarily to help us.
Right, right. Okay, so I'm starting to get the big picture here.
Hmm.
But if these algorithms are constantly learning and evolving, does that mean their machine habitus is changing too?
That's a great question. And it leads us to another concept that Airoldi brings up, hysteresis.
Hysteresis. That sounds familiar, but I can't place it.
Yeah, it's borrowed from physics.
Okay.
But in this context, it basically means that an algorithm's past experiences can create a lag in its ability to adapt.
Like even as the social context is changing, the algorithm's machine habitus might not keep up.
So it's like bad habits dying hard.
Exactly. And this can lead to mismatches between how an algorithm behaves and what's going on in society right now.
Yeah.
Like an algorithm trained on data from a decade ago might not accurately reflect current social norms or values.
Okay, so that makes sense. But it also raises an important question. How do we actually navigate this world that's becoming more and more algorithmic? Are we just stuck with whatever these evolving machine habitus throw at us? Or do we have some control?
That's something we'll dive into in the next part of our discussion. We'll explore how people are interacting with, understanding, and even resisting the influence of algorithms. Welcome back to our deep dive into Machine Habitus. Last time we were talking about how algorithms develop these, digital
Right,
personalities.
shaped other creators and the data they consume.
Exactly. And now we're going to get into how these digital beings, so like how you put that, interact with us.
And how those interactions shape our online experiences, often in ways we don't even realize.
Okay, I'm ready to go deeper down the rabbit hole. So, like, how do these interactions actually play out in our everyday lives? Are we just, like, passively accepting whatever these algorithms give us?
Oh, it's not that simple. Airoldi talks about these different ways people engage with algorithms
Right.
and how those interactions actually affect how the algorithms evolve over time.
I'm all ears. Give me some examples of these different types of interaction.
He outlines 4 types, and they're all based on 2 things. How much users understand about how algorithms work. He calls that informational asymmetry.
Okay.
And how well the algorithm's goals align with the user's needs and values. That's cultural alignment.
Okay.
Let's start with what he calls being subjected.
Being subjected doesn't sound very fun.
It's not. This is basically when you, as the user, have very little understanding of how the algorithm works.
Right.
And the algorithm itself isn't really designed to benefit you. So, high informational asymmetry, low cultural alignment.
So, like, you feel manipulated, but you don't even know why or how.
Exactly. Think about when you see those, like, totally irrelevant ads, or you feel stuck in a filter bubble on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Or when you feel like, your privacy's been invaded. Those are classic examples of being subjected.
Okay, so what's the next type of interaction?
He calls it being nudged.
Okay.
And this is where things get a bit more subtle. You might not fully grasp how the algorithm works, but it's designed to, kind of gently guide you towards certain choices.
Oh?
Choices that align with the algorithm's goals, of course.
So the algorithms are playing a bit of a mind game with us.
Kind of.
Oh.
They're using their machine habitus to subtly persuade us. Think about, personalized recommendations on shopping sites, or how social media feeds prioritize content that keeps you scrolling.
Right.
Or even those fitness apps that use, like, gamification to motivate you. They're tapping into our desires, our habits, our own habitus, you could say.
It's like they're whispering in our ear, buy this, click that, watch one more video.
Yeah, and we often don't even realize it's happening. But it's important to be aware of these subtle forms of persuasion.
Right. It can really change our behavior.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got being subjected and being nudged.
Okay.
The third type is collaborating.
Collaborating.
Yeah, and as you might guess, this is more of a partnership. You have a decent understanding of how the algorithm works.
Okay.
And it's designed to work with you to help you achieve some kind of goal.
So it's not all doom and gloom then. There are times when we can actually use these algorithms to our advantage.
Absolutely. And that's what's so interesting about this from a sociological point of view. It shows that we're not just helpless pawns in all of this.
Right.
We can understand these algorithms, we can learn their rules, and we can even use them to achieve our own goals.
What's like a concrete example of this collaboration?
Think about music recommendation algorithms.
That's
like, the ones that let you give feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Right. The more you use it, the better it gets at understand your taste.
Right, like a personal DJ almost.
Exactly. Or think about navigation apps that let you customize your routes.
Yeah.
Avoid highways, take the scenic route.
Right.
Those algorithms are adapting to your needs. They're more like partners than dictators.
Okay, so being subjected, being nudged, collaborating.
Yeah.
There's one more, right?
The last one is exploiting.
Okay.
And this is, I guess, the most strategic of the 4. This is when you have a deep understanding of how an algorithm works. Maybe even a deeper understanding than the people who designed it.
Okay.
And you use that knowledge to your advantage.
Now we're talking hacking.
Not necessarily hacking in, like in a legal way, but definitely a more intentional, strategic use of algorithms.
Okay.
Think about, like, social media influencers who know exactly how to game the system to boost their visibility.
Right.
They're like puppet masters.
Yeah. Or businesses that use SEO to manipulate their rankings in Google search results. They're not breaking the rules, but they're definitely bending them. They're using their knowledge of the algorithm to get what they want.
So it's like a constant game of cat and mouse. The algorithms are trying to predict us, control us, and we're finding ways to outsmart them.
That's a great way to put it. It really shows that tension between, our own agency and the power of these algorithms.
Yeah.
And that tension is really shaping the whole digital landscape we live in.
It's amazing to think about how these different types of interactions are happening all around us, all the time. Whether we realize it or not, we're constantly negotiating this relationship with these algorithms, trying to find that that sweet spot between control and being controlled.
And that awareness is so crucial. Understanding these interactions is really the first step to taking back some control over our digital lives
Yeah.
and shaping the future of technology so that it serves humanity.
Okay, so these 4 ways of interacting with algorithms, being subjected, nudged, collaborating, and exploiting. But Airoldi, he goes even deeper, right? He talks about how machine habitus can influence entire social fields, like art, music, even politics.
That's right. To understand this, we need to go back to the concept of the field, as Bourdieu describes it. It's basically a structured social space where people are competing for resources, recognition, influence. Think of the fields of art, education, politics, or even something like, the organic food market.
Okay, yeah, the field idea makes sense. But how do algorithms fit into that?
Airoldi argues that algorithms, through their machine habitus, become active participants in these fields. They're not just tools anymore, they're actually shaping how these fields work. They're affecting who has power, how information flows, even creating new social norms.
So they're not just watching the game from the sidelines, they're actually on the field playing.
Exactly. And that's a big shift. We can't think of social fields as being just for humans anymore. Algorithms are in the mix, and their machine habitus is changing the game.
Can you give me an example of how this plays out in a specific field?
Let's take music, which Airoldi talks about a lot. Before streaming and recommendation algorithms, discovering new music was mostly shaped by human gatekeepers.
Right, record labels, radio DJs, critics.
Exactly. They had a lot of power over what music people heard, who got popular.
Right.
But with platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, algorithms have a much bigger role now. They're analyzing our listening habits, suggesting new artists, making personalized playlists.
It's like having a digital music expert who knows your taste even better than you do.
Yeah. And it's convenient, but it also means algorithms now have a huge influence on what music we discover, who makes it big, even how genres are defined.
So these algorithms are not just like automating tasks, they're actually restructuring entire fields, like changing the rules of the game.
That's the point. And it raises a big question, are these algorithms playing fair? Or are they just making existing power structures and inequalities worse?
Yeah, that's crucial. Are they helping to create a more diverse and inclusive music landscape? Or are they just repeating the biases of the past?
It's complex. Airoldi looks at both sides of the issue. On one hand, he recognizes that algorithms can definitely perpetuate those biases and inequalities we talked about.
Right, that society in, society out thing.
Exactly. If the data reflects existing inequalities, then the algorithm's probably going to keep them going. But he also suggests that algorithms can, in the right circumstances, actually challenge those power dynamics and create new opportunities for artists who might have been overlooked before.
Okay, how could that happen?
Well, think about those recommendation algorithms that help you discover, like niche music genres or independent artists or music from different cultures.
Right, things you might never have found on your own.
Exactly. They can help us break out of our bubbles and experience new sounds and perspectives.
That's encouraging. But it sounds like there's a big if there. Like, what are the conditions that would allow algorithms to be more inclusive, not just reinforce those biases?
Airoldi argues that it all comes down to whether they're designed and used in a way that explicitly prioritizes inclusivity and diversity. It's not enough to just hope for the best. We have to intentionally build algorithms that fight against those biases.
So it's about the values and intentions of the people behind the algorithms. It's like that Deus in machina idea again, right?
Exactly. The way these algorithms develop and impact society ultimately depends on us, on the choices we make.
Okay, I'm seeing the connections here, but it's still a bit abstract.
Yeah.
Can we bring it down to earth? Like, how does this machine habitus actually play out in a real person's life?
To answer that, we need to talk about technosocial entanglements.
Technosocial what?
Entanglements. It's basically this idea that our lives are so interwoven with technology, it's almost impossible to separate the two anymore.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. My phone is basically part of me at this point.
Exactly. And what Airoldi's saying is that these technosocial entanglements aren't just about convenience or entertainment. They're about power, identity, and what sociologists call social reproduction.
Wait, social reproduction. Now you're really getting academic on me.
I know. But it's an important idea. It helps us understand how social structures and inequalities, those patterns, they stay around.
Right.
Social reproduction is how those patterns get passed down, often in ways we don't even see.
Okay.
And Airoldi argues that algorithms, with their machine habitus, are becoming part of that process.
So they're not just reflecting those biases, they're actually making them stronger.
That's the idea. And it's pretty significant when you consider how much we rely on algorithms for, well, everything these days.
Okay, I get it, but can you give me a real-life example of how this techno-social entanglement actually plays out?
Let's say we have someone, a young professional, let's call her Sarah. She uses technology a lot for work and in her personal life.
Okay.
She's on social media, she reads news online, shops for pretty much everything online.
Sounds like a lot of people these days.
Exactly. But what's interesting is how all of these seemingly ordinary interactions are actually shaping her habitus.
Okay.
Her tastes, her beliefs, even her understanding of the world. For instance, the news she reads online, it's often filtered through those algorithms that prioritize certain types of content based on what she's clicked on before.
Ah, so it's creating that filter bubble effect.
Right. She's mostly exposed to news that confirms what she already thinks, even if it's not the whole story.
Right.
And it's not just news. Think about social media algorithms. They choose what posts she sees, and they're designed to keep her scrolled.
Right.
Which often means showing her content that, aligns with her interests and values, but maybe presents it in a really inflammatory or divisive way.
So even her social connections are being shaped by these algorithms.
To some extent, yeah. It's not that she's completely isolated, but the algorithm is definitely narrowing her field of vision,
Right.
reinforcing her existing biases, and maybe limiting her exposure to different viewpoints.
It's like she's seeing the world through these digital glasses that are distorting her perception.
Exactly. And that's why understanding this concept of machine habitus is so important. It helps us see how these technosocial entanglements can be both good and bad. They connect us in ways we never thought possible, but they can also limit our choices, shape our perceptions, and even make social inequalities worse.
Okay, so what's the way forward then? Are we just stuck being shaped by these digital forces?
Yep.
Can we break free from this cycle, create a more just and equitable digital future?
That's the big question, and it's one that we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll dig a little deeper into this concept of technosocial reproduction and see if it's even possible to resist the power of machine habitus, to reclaim our own digital agency.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been, really getting into Massimo Airoldi's Machine Habitus, figuring out how algorithms get these digital personalities
Yeah.
and how those personalities shape our whole online experience.
Exactly. We've talked about the different ways people interact with them, like feeling subjected by an algorithm or actively collaborating.
Right.
And we even touched on how this whole machine habitus thing can influence huge social fields like the music industry.
Right. It's a lot to take in. But, thinking about the future, where do we go from here? What does all this mean?
That's where things get really interesting. Airoldi uses this term technosocial reproduction. It's how algorithms aren't just reflecting existing social structures, but they're actually shaping them too, like reinforcing them.
Okay, remind me, what does social reproduction mean again? It sounds kind of academic.
Think about it this way. Societies have patterns, right? Inequalities, power dynamics, all that. They tend to stick around. Social reproduction is how those patterns get passed down, often in ways we don't even notice.
So it's like those biases we talked about. An algorithm trained on data that has those biases in it could end up making them even worse.
Exactly. And Airoldi says that algorithms are becoming part of that cycle of social reproduction. It's not just that they're biased, they're actually helping those biases shape our world.
It's a bit scary when you think about how much we use algorithms for, well, pretty much everything these days.
It is. We've seen algorithms used in so many areas, like loan applications, job recommendations, even things like criminal justice and healthcare. It's a big deal.
Yeah, we already mentioned some real-world examples of this, like that Compass system.
Right.
The one that unfairly targeted Black defendants as high risk. And those AI recruiting tools that discriminated against women.
Exactly. And those are just a couple examples. There are probably tons more. As we use algorithms more and more to make decisions that impact people's lives, it's more important than ever that we address this whole technosocial reproduction problem.
So what can we do? How do we avoid a future where algorithms just make those inequalities worse? Is there any hope?
Airoldi doesn't think it's completely hopeless.
Yeah.
He offers some ideas, and one of the main ones is demanding more transparency from the companies and institutions that are creating and using these algorithms. We need to hold them accountable.
So basically, we need to peek inside those black boxes and figure out how they're making decisions.
Exactly. We need to know what data they're using, how these algorithms are designed, and who's deciding how they get implemented. And it's not just about the technical stuff, it's also about the social and ethical implications of this technology.
It's not enough to just understand the code. We have to understand the values and assumptions that are built into it.
Exactly. And that's where social scientists, ethicists, even everyday people come in. We need to be having conversations about what kind of society we want and how technology can help us get there.
So it's about bringing a more human-centered perspective to how we develop and use technology.
Yes, and a big part of that is promoting something Airoldi calls algorithmic literacy.
Algorithmic literacy, huh? So is that like learning to code?
Not really. It's more about understanding how algorithms work, how they impact our lives, and how we can make informed decisions about using them.
So it's like uh, being able to spot those filter bubbles, recognizing when an algorithm is trying to nudge us in a certain direction, maybe even figuring out how to, use them to our advantage.
That's the idea. It's about recognizing that algorithms aren't these neutral forces. They're designed by humans, and they reflect human values, biases, and choices.
So if we want to make the digital world more fair and equitable, we have to take responsibility for the algorithms we create and how we use them.
That's a great way to put it. Machine Habitus is really a call to action. It's asking us to be more aware of our relationship with technology and to be more intentional about how we use it.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether,
Mm.
but understanding it and using it to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive, I think the most important message for our listeners is that the future of technology is not set in stone. We're creating it together every time we click, like, or search for something online.
That's a powerful thought. So, as you go about your digital life, remember, you have a voice. You have the power to shape the digital world in ways you might not even realize. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.